Well, again, welcome, and it's great seeing some of our Mambrino people, but it's really exciting to see others from other churches, so welcome. We hope that this can be a benefit for you all. And we're going to each one of us introduce our own selves when we speak, and I'm just kind of the welcomer, and then I'll end with resources. But to give you a little bit of background real quick, I guess I've been in working for programs for children for 35 years now. So I have probably been through more trainings and classes than I can even think of. So my heart has always been there for children from hard places, and that's what we'll talk about today. I worked out in West Texas for CPS for my first 3 years. That was super hard, but I grew up fast, and I did learn a lot, I really did. But then I became a mental health children's director out in West Texas for a mental health MHMR there. And then the rest of my career has been with early childhood intervention, which is your federal program for 0 to 3-year-olds. I work out of Fort Worth, but we cover 12 counties, so Hood County is one of them. So I've received lots of training there. On the screen, you can see some of our objectives for today. We're hoping that you leave here, like I mentioned, with a better knowledge of children from hard places. We're hoping to give you a taste of our vision of what we could do, and hope we spark an interest in you, because I'm sure you realize in less than an hour, which we will kind of give some information, we can't present everything. So the second one is that we'll be covering the neurobiological impacts of trauma, and then some common developmental delays associated with trauma. And then, which Mindy will cover the neurobiological, Anna will the developmental delays, and then I'll come back to me on resources, and then we'll have our guests speak that are from Heart Gallery. So those are the objectives for the day. We also have listed up there is the resources that we've learned from. The first one was the TCU Institute of Child Development, which there's an acronym TBRI, which is Trauma-Based Relational Intervention. Mindy, Anna, and I, and along with, we have a couple in our congregation, the Barons, have all been trained in that institute. We also got information at Harvard Medical School and the University of Texas Child Development Center. So, Mindy?
I've got one. It might seem strange that we're using a microphone when it's just a few of us, but we're recording today, and so we want really good sound quality. So just bear with us on the awkward microphone. Are we recording already? Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm Mindy Spruill. I am an LMFTS, which stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist Supervisor. I have worked in community mental health for 15 years. With the bulk of that being as the clinical director for a nonprofit. And we specialized in working with kids from trauma, so trauma recovery treatment, as well as family counseling. So that, I'm not going to go too much more into my background, but that's kind of the point of why I've spent so much of my life really digging into the effects of trauma. So we're going to jump right in. Lecture style is never like the way to go, but that's what we're doing today, because we're going to cover a whole lot of ground in this hour. So let's start with what is trauma. Let's get a really nice working definition that we're all going to be pulling from. So trauma refers to the lasting emotional, physical, and spiritual impact of distressing events. You have two types of trauma. You have singular traumatic events where something happened to somebody, a car accident, an unexpected death. And you also have what's called complex or compounding trauma, so ongoing trauma. And that's going to be your things like abuse, neglect. Singular traumatic events do not typically create lasting impacts on neurobiology, the brain development, or the nervous system. Those traumatic events do create a post-traumatic stress response within the context. So it might be something like if you've been in a fender bender, you've been rear-ended, you might find yourself every time you're pulling up to a red light, you're kind of checking behind you, right? So that's kind of a traumatic response versus having developmental impacts of trauma. So when you have complex compounding trauma, that's pervasive. So that's when you see what we're going to get to in depth in a second, those developmental impacts, but that's where you see it impacting the person across their lifestyle. So it's not just within the context of the trauma, that's where you start to see them having difficulties in everyday life, in all of their relationships. There are many forms of trauma. I think most people can easily identify abuse and neglect, but there was a study done probably about a decade ago called the ACEs study. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what that study found was that there were several things that caused this developmental neurobiological impact on a person. So those things are abuse and neglect, witnessing domestic violence, intensive medical needs. So if you have a young kiddo who has kind of some kind of a medical need where they're in and out of the hospital, where they have a lot of even risks to their own health, that can create it. An incarcerated parent, being raised by a parent with mental health issues, poverty, having a parent with substance abuse, or the unexpected death of a parent or caregiver. So all of those things can be compounding complex trauma. Okay. Oh, and trauma occurs at all ages, but it's most impactful in early childhood, and we're about to talk more about that. So let's start with some just kind of good information on the brain development. 90% of the brain develops between the ages of 0 to 5. That's why we call those the formative years. You see rapid brain development in those years. The last 10% of the brain develops over the span of childhood into the early 20s. And so that last 10% slowly develops until 24 to 26 for women and 26 to 28 for men. Sorry, guys, you're just not quite as fast as us. So that's why you see a 3-year-old is very different than a 4-year-old, and a 4-year-old is very different than a 5-year-old. But an 8-year-old is kind of similar to a 10-year-old because you see rapid development 0 to 5 and then slow progress until about 25. Okay, so we're going to look at the brain. We're not going to get like super nitty gritty, but the things that are most important in understanding trauma are what we call the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. I'm having a hard time remembering to make the mic follow my face, so if you don't hear me, let me know. So if you take your hand, you can actually make a pretty decent diagram of a brain. So if you put your thumb right here and fold your fingers over, that kind of represents the brain. So here's the brainstem, that's the top, and then in here is what's called your midbrain. So your upstairs brain, that is what we call your thinking brain. That's your prefrontal cortex. And what that prefrontal cortex does is it regulates thoughts, actions, and emotions through intellect. So that's why it's the thinking brain. It houses your executive functioning skills. So these are things like emotional control, planning and time management, organization, inhibitory control, initiating and completing tasks, being able to follow multi-step directions, and your ability to focus and maintain attention. So, you know, the 10% we said like takes forever to develop? That's that part. And so when you have young kiddos, that's why you hear a lot of stuff about age-appropriate expectations. Those are the skills that are created slowly until 25. And so kids do struggle. Even kids being, brought up in safe, healthy, loving homes, they're going to struggle with these things because that's the part of the brain that's not completely online yet. Whenever a child is exposed to trauma, this part of the brain gets underdevelopment, so it completely freezes when intense trauma comes in. Okay, So now let's talk about the downstairs brain. The downstairs brain is what we call the feeling brain or the primitive brain. And this is where your limbic system is. So things like your amygdala, your hippocampus, these are the parts of the brain that hold your automatic responses to things. So it's your stress and danger response. It's thirst and hunger and reproduction. So that's the part of the brain that never needs to be told what to do. It just acts as it perceives the environment around it. So, for example, kind of going back to a car accident analogy, if you're driving and you see someone from the oncoming lane start to swerve into your lane and you just bail out into the ditch and you get there and you're like, I never even thought about getting in the ditch. It just kind of, here I am. That's your downstairs brain working as it should. Okay, so the presence of trauma overdevelops this part of the brain. So those kiddos are constantly having to perceive threat and risk around them. So that feeling primitive brain overdevelops, that thinking executive functioning brain slows down and underdevelops, so all of the focus can go towards the part of the brain that needs safety. The next thing to understand is the brain and the nervous system have automatic stress responses. You've probably heard of fight, flight, freeze, but there's actually a fourth one that's not as well known called fawn. There's a fawning response as well. So let's kind of break those down. Fight, when this stress response is healthy, the fight response can allow for solid boundaries to be enforced. So this does not mean physical fighting, but more so someone using clear, direct means of communication and body language to protect themselves and put a barrier between themselves and a perceived threat. Someone who is assertive but not aggressive is a good example of a healthy fight response. When unhealthy or developing under distress, it's an active self-preservation function where you move reactively towards conflict with anger and aggression. So it's a fear state where you confront the threat and stand up and assert yourself as means of protection and to feel in control of the surroundings. The flight response. When healthy, the flight response can allow you to be discerning in stressful situations and disengage within limits. So when it's healthy, it looks like someone who knows when to walk away from an escalated situation, take time to calm down, and then re-engage the issue from a more emotionally regulated frame of mind. However, when unhealthy, it's taken a step further by completely isolating yourself from others and relationships. So it's disengaging without the expectation of ever going back. So it's a complete emotional and physical cutoff from stressful situations or people. This is avoidance rather than emotional regulation. And then the freeze response. When healthy, the freeze response can help you to slow down and discern the situation carefully to determine next steps. When unhealthy, it relates to dissociation and immobilizing behaviors. When this defense is enacted, it often results in feeling literally frozen. This may look like sleeping a lot, having a loss for words, or feeling foggy-headed when talking about a stressful topic. It can look like, for kiddos, hours and hours playing video games, binge watching TV shows, or the use of drugs and alcohol to numb everything out around you. Specifically, you'll see it with alcohol and marijuana. The freeze response is similar to the flight in that it is an avoidance, maladaptive coping mechanism. Fawn. So fawning is the person who is very agreeable. They never cause a problem. They're just, along there doing whatever you want them to do. They kind of melt into the background because they don't want to rock the boat. Whenever this is under distress with trauma, the problem is that it's a form of internalizing trauma. And so someone who fawns as a response to their distress typically ends up with diagnoses like anxiety, depression, suicidality. So when healthy, a fawn response can help you in relational skills by knowing when to be accommodating and compromising for the betterment of all people involved in the situation. When unhealthy, it causes someone to respond to perceived threat by becoming more appealing to the threat. They will mirror and merge with the other's desires, no matter how damaging or wrong they may be. And they're doing this to try to appease the other person in order to minimize the threat as much as possible. So for a child growing up in trauma and prolonged distress, the limbic system that is responsible for all of this stays engaged and goes into overdrive. Most kids from hard places will experience multiple stress responses just like we do. There's going to be times where you're going to freeze, and there's going to be times where you're going to fight, just depending on the context around you. Same with these kiddos. But their stress responses are much, much more intense. And so, sometimes they will respond with fight, maybe if they don't have enough food. If it's inconsistent food, you might see them fight for food, hoard food, get angry if you try to take food away. Or you might see them freeze. If adults start arguing, even if it's in a non-threatening way, they may freeze in those moments. And so having these inconsistent stress responses can make it a little bit tricky. It can feel very chaotic as you're getting to know that kid because it seems like it's all over the place. But the more time you spend with them and the more you get to know them, you will see those patterns emerge. Like, okay, when food's involved, here's their common response. When it's conflict, here's their common response. So you'll start to see these little patterns come up as you spend more time with them. So for a child growing up in a safe and loving home, the brain's stress response develops in a healthy way that allows the child to more accurately learn how to discern situations. So for them to be able to tell what is truly threatening versus what is a fear. And then they can identify the proper response because they have more access to a better developed executive functioning brain. I think the best example to kind of like put this into a visual is what's called the shark example. And this might be from TBRI. Does this sound familiar? Okay, I was like, I don't know where I got this, but I've used it for years. I've used it with every single family I've worked with when there's trauma involved. So I'm going to read it to you. It's a little bit technical, and I did not even attempt to memorize it. And so the shark example. A child is at the beach playing in the water and sees a shark. That child's stress response will kick in by starting with the eyes and ears, sending information to the amygdala, which is the emotional processing center of the brain. We call this where the shark music comes in. So think about Jaws, right? Dun, dun, like there is something really bad about to happen here. The amygdala interprets the images and sounds and perceives the danger, so it instantly sends a stress signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the command center of the brain and communicates with the rest of the body, namely the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has two main components, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system functions like a gas pedal in a car. It triggers the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, providing the body with a burst of energy so that it can respond to the dangers. So with the child at the beach, he'll get a boost of adrenaline. His heart rate will increase to pump more blood to his muscles and vital organs. His pulse rate and blood pressure will rise. He will start breathing heavy to send more oxygen to the brain so that he can stay alert, and cortisol will release to keep the body revved up and on high alert. All of these things will happen so rapidly that he probably won't even be aware of these physiological changes. It's an automatic response. That's why, again, we call it the primitive or the feeling brain. It doesn't need to be told what to do. Its main function is to keep the person alive. For a child who has had healthy brain development, this command center will likely trigger the flight response, and he will put as much distance as possible between him and the shark. So again, all of this is called the gas pedal. This is the sympathetic nervous system kicking into action to prepare his body to do what it needs to do to get out of harm's way. Okay, once the child is in a safe place where the shark cannot get to him, he will recognize through his executive functioning or the thinking brain that the threat has passed, his cortisol levels will fall, and the parasympathetic nervous system or the brakes will kick into gear. This is the part of the nervous system that controls the body's ability to relax, and it keeps you from overworking. The parasympathetic nervous system allows the heart rate back down and regulates the breathing, among other things, but ultimately it is what helps bring the body back to a calm and resting state. However, when childhood trauma is present, the brain gets wired differently. Developing brains that are primed to deal with nearly constant stress and danger can struggle to respond appropriately to situations that would otherwise appear normal and non-threatening. To put this another way, a child that has been abused or has been living in a house where domestic violence is present has a reality where the shark lives in the house. So just to clarify, we're not calling the family members a shark, but rather the risk to safety is the shark. So his command center stays activated almost all of the time. His gas pedal gets stuck on go and brakes do not kick in. That parasympathetic nervous system, the brakes, go offline, and the sympathetic nervous system, the gas, stays online as a protective defense mechanism. This child's ability to accurately interpret real danger versus perceived danger gets severely impacted. So going back to the beginning, this child's amygdala goes into overdrive. It is having to interpret so many frightening images and sounds that the child lives in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This child's body is hearing shark music all of the time. So the emotional regulation centers of the brain do not develop properly, and his parasympathetic nervous system response, the calming response, does not function as it should. So I introduced two new things in that example, which were the two nervous systems, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So now let's look how these contribute to the development of the child. This is what we call the regulation cycle. So starting as soon as the baby is born, this cycle begins to happen. A child expresses a need or distress. A safe and loving caregiver responds. The child is soothed and co-regulated. So you can see, child expresses distress. We call that the sympathetic nervous system engages. The child is crying. They're emotionally elevated. They are not okay. And then the caregiver responds, and what we call co-regulation is you just help soothe the child. You meet the need, you help calm the child down because they think of a baby, they can't do this yet, so the caregiver comes and helps them do that. They are initiating the brakes for that baby. They're helping the baby relax and go back to a calm, resting state. This cycle happens thousands of times in early childhood in a healthy home. And that's what brings your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system online in the right way. The right one engages when it needs to, the other one and it knows when to stop when it's done, and the other one comes in. So when that cycle happens, thousands and thousands and thousands of times, as that child approaches middle childhood, then they can self-regulate, right? They've been taught how to do this through the caregiver, through experience with the caregiver. And they've had this executive functioning developing in the background. So when they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, you can say, hey, go over there and get calm. Go have a seat, get calm, because they've been co-regulated and now they can self-regulate. So caregivers carry out action to help the child when he or she is distressed or has a need. The child learns they can be in a state of distress but have the capacity to recover. This is what's called resiliency building. So it's never the goal to stand in between the child and the world. Healthy distress is actually what creates this ability. We use this relational experience to help shape the brain structure for emotional regulation. So through this cycle, it's actually building those synaptic connections or the communication between parts of the brain and the nervous system. So this is healthy, right? This is when everything's working well. What happens when abuse comes into the picture? We call this nervous system dysregulation. So when there is chronic, ongoing abuse, neglect, or some kind of trauma, that cycle's not happening. And so the black line is meant to represent a child growing up in a healthy home. So the green dotted lines on either side is called the window of tolerance. And I don't know how well y'all can see that, but so we all have a window of tolerance where a stressor comes in and we have emotional fluctuation, right? Like we get scared or we get sad or we get happy. And so when your nervous system is working as it should, you're going to have emotional highs and lows, but within a window of tolerance because you have a healthy brain that can get you back on track. The red line is a kiddo from trauma. So what you'll see with a kid from trauma is they have a very small window of tolerance. It does not take much to get them into explosive behaviors because they don't have that healthy brain that they're working from. And so you'll see really intense highs, so maybe explosive anger. So you'll notice like the black line kind of gradually moves, but with a kid from trauma, you're going to see explosive movement, really high highs and really low lows. And whenever you have a kiddo that gets kind of stuck on the high, so the sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal is what just gets stuck on go. Those are your kids that have hyperactivity. They're very hypervigilant. They're always scanning the surrounding to perceive threat. They have anxiety, panic attacks, anger, and rage. That's how you know their sympathetic nervous system is online. Whenever you have a kiddo that gets stuck into parasympathetic nervous system, that's hypoarousal. Those are your kids that have depression. They're very disconnected. They have a flat affect, meaning not a lot of emotional response is shown, exhaustion, and numbing out behaviors. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about when this stuff happens. I'm not going to get into a lot of this part of it, but I do want you to know a common question is, so what age can all of this start happening to a child? Like, what if I get a baby right as soon as they were born? Like, did we get ahead of it and skirt all that? Yes and no is the answer. So early intervention is the best method. You want the child out of the unsafe environment as quickly as you can before that brain structure really starts getting developed in a maladaptive way. However, there is some, not necessarily newer research, but newer in the field of research. It's been around a couple decades at least, but it's called epigenetics. And what they found in this research is that when a mother is pregnant and she is in a traumatizing environment, maybe she is a victim of domestic violence and she's pregnant with this baby, her distress response, nervous system response actually kind of imprints on that baby. And so when these babies were born, through urine samples and blood samples, I believe, they tested and they found increased, like really, really high levels of cortisol, your stress hormone, and adrenaline, your nervous system response hormone. And so there is, like I said, it's very in the weeds type of research, but if you want to look more into that, it's very interesting. So it's important to know that there are impacts even starting in utero when there's a lot of trauma. And then I wanted to mention developmental touch points or milestones. So these are kind of those ages and stages. Like, you look at a 5-year-old and they kind of do things this way. You look at a 10-year-old and they do things another way as they're developing. What you will also see is children reprocessing their trauma at those developmental milestones. So again, let's go back to the thinking brain. The prefrontal cortex is slowly developing. And as it develops, that child begins to understand what happened to them in a new way. They've got more ability to think and have more cognitive power behind their history. And so as they develop, they reprocess that trauma and try to make meaning out of that trauma with their new capabilities. Okay, and this is Anna.
I think I'm going to stand up because I move around so much when I talk. I almost fell out of this chair twice, so I'm going to stand up. And I'm going to turn this and hope I don't mess it up. Okay, my name is Anna Wilson, and I am a speech-language pathologist, but I'm actually retired. So I worked for about 8 years solely with children 0 to 3, a couple older kids, but mostly early childhood development. Currently, I work on child development at home with my 4 children. They keep me busy enough, so I am not in the field right now, but I think it's important to note the last couple of years of my career, I was in a program called HOPES, and so I was on a team of psychiatrists, psychologists, early development specialist, and myself. I was the speech therapist on the team, and so we would go see the kids from the worst of the worst situations and decide, is this developmental? Is there actually a speech delay? Is this trauma, or is this autism? Or is it all 3? So sometimes it would be all. So part of my training was to identify signs, symptoms of autism too. And what I came to find out is a lot of people would think a child was on the spectrum just because of the adverse behaviors. But being a communication specialist, I'm like, hey, actually, I think this is trauma after digging in, because there's very stark differences that you see. So that was kind of my background and what I did in the last parts. So there's 2 ways to handle this. I could read off developmental delays. I don't know that that's helpful. I think what I'm going to do, and I think it's more helpful, is I want you to see all the developmental things that have to happen in order for your child to talk, in order for your child to eat or move. There's a lot of baseline things that need to happen first. So typically I would have a parent or a caregiver say, I just want my child to talk. I just want my child to eat. Those are great, good goals, but that's a goal for down there. Like that's our goal down there. So let's think about the things that need to be happening before a child is able to talk or walk or eat. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but 4 to 6 months, giggles and laughs, responds to facial expressions, blows raspberries, vocalizes during play. So when we're thinking about this and we're thinking about communication in general, it's not just words. So I would have a child with autism, and they'd say, mama, mama, mama. They had the word. They were never looking at mom. They were not trying to get her attention. They didn't actually need anything. They were just copying a word. Is that communication? It's not, right? So we don't want them to just talk. We want them to communicate. And so it's a back and forth. So these foundational things like vocalizing during play, what does a caregiver do when their baby's going, ba, 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 ba? What do? You turn to that baby and you're going, ba, 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 ba. And they look at you and they're so excited that you saw what they did and they want to do it again. That's back and forth turn taking. So when you have a baby who's from neglect and doesn't get that back and forth, we've already lost one of the steps of communication. Is a turn taking. It's a social thing. It's a fun thing. A lot of times too, with that vocal play, and we'll talk about it again, putting and feeding, from families that have lower education and don't realize that's a good thing. Shh, be quiet, be quiet. They'll actually tell them to be quiet and yell at them to stop. And so then they don't get that practice of vocalization. You'd be surprised how often that would happen. I'm like, no, that's a good thing. Or I would have a parent say, oh, we only speak in correct sentences to our baby. I'm like, how are they doing that back to you? Is that going well? That's a good thing. Like, that's an innate thing, God-given thing, where you're like, I want to turn to that baby and blow raspberries right back. That's actually a good thing. So reaches out, gives objects. You're starting to put words with objects so their vocabulary is growing. So if they're not being able to do that with a caregiver, they're missing out on that. The copying is what I was talking about. Saying 1 to 2 words, blowing kisses, looks around when asked where. So one of the main things I think caregivers aren't thinking about is the receptive language or what they're understanding. So a child is going to hear millions of words, millions of times before they actually say them in that first year. And so if they're not hearing those words, they're not going to understand them. If they don't understand them, they're not going to use those correctly. So I would have a parent get very frustrated with me that I was working on those receptive goals. I'm like, but I want them to talk. Like, they have to understand. So I would start talking to them in Spanish, and the parent would look at me. I'm like, so talk back to me in Spanish. And they're like, well, I don't know Spanish. And I'm like, but if I said, pelota, 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 and I was holding a ball, what's that? Pelota. Because you heard it several times and I taught it to you. And so really, really focusing on that receptive language, on understanding before use. Again, kiddo from trauma is not going to have those as many opportunities potentially, or be so scared of the caregiver, or that they're not going to want to. They're going to do one of those responses and shut down. So with the cognitive development, that's that upper level thinking, recognizes the bottle, recognizes a familiar caregiver. So when there is not a response from a baby to the caregiver that they have been with, that's a red flag. There should be some kind of body movement. Eyes should get big. That's that cognitive development and that relationship. Communicate happy and sad. Even at 4 months, like you as a parent, you know when your baby is crying, how she's hungry, or oh, she's mad because I put them in that seat. You know the differences in their cries. They're already communicating that way. Uses hands and mouth to explore. This is a big one I found with lower SES families from socioeconomic status, that they did not think babies were supposed to put things in their mouth. And so they would swat a lot out of their mouth. Like, no, don't put that in your mouth. No, don't put that in your mouth. A lot's going on with the sensory and cognition and feeling. This is tough. This is hard. This is soft. This is bumpy. They're starting to play with that. And that affects feeding. So if they're not having the opportunity to put weird textures in their mouth, a lot of times what we'll see is a feeding delay because they haven't been able to do that oral play. Like, that's actually very, very important that a baby can put their hands in their mouth, that they can put toys in their mouth. That's how they explore and learn at that age. I just found that often. And a lot of times it wasn't knowing, oh, help me, I don't even have Word on my computer at home. I need somebody else to. I opened it to work on this. I was like, oh, I don't have Word. Okay, some more of the cognitive. Puts things in and out of containers, so spatial things. Oh, this doesn't fit. I need to problem solve here. Let me find the one that fits. Lack of an opportunity for that. Scribbles with a crayon and pen. You talk about all the fine motor skills if they don't have access to those things. Let's see, puzzle pieces. A lot of families from poverty are not going to have access to these things. Now, kids can play with anything. I'm not saying that they need all these developmental toys, but sometimes just the opportunity to get to play. Play is so, so important. So if they're contained in a playpen or in a bouncer and they're not getting to explore, you're going to see some of that upper level thinking is delayed because they've had not as much opportunity. One note before I move on with both of these things is medical neglect. So a lot of these kids who may have had chronic ear infections that were never treated, there can be lasting hearing loss from untreated. It rots the inner bones in the middle ear. So that fluid, if it's not drained properly, will rot those, and it can cause permanent hearing loss. And so if that's not treated, then that can be a concern, and it's going to potentially cause a hearing or a speech delay because it's like they're listening underwater. So everything's distorted. If they've had that for a prolonged time, then you're going to have to play catch up. And that's why I want you to see those foundational things that we do first. You may have to backtrack a little bit. Now, I've had kids that got tubes, and within a month, they are all of a sudden back to to where they should be. It was incredible, the changes. So medical neglect, keep that in mind. I did the right button. Do it again. Okay, the effects of poverty. So this has been from graduate school. This is something that we learned, how, especially in the school system, they were seeing that families from poverty were really struggling, those kids, with reading, really struggling with their language scores. And so they did this study, and it's very interesting. So children from low-income families have been shown to have limited input in terms of the volume and quality when compared to children, and that's with language, to children of wealthier families. And so if you scroll down to the bottom, in a 1-year span, children from professional families have heard at least 4 million utterances, while children from welfare families had only heard 250,000 words. And of the words that they heard, they were based on basic needs. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? What do you need? Get down. Instead of rich language with a high vocabulary. So these kids are going to school hearing far fewer words and playing a huge catch up from those kiddos that have already had a very increased vocabulary. So if you've got an older kiddo and they're really struggling in school, potentially they have just not had the access to the vocabulary. So something to keep in mind on that. Okay, feeding. So just the basic wants of a caregiver is able to feed the child. I saw the most frustration is with feeding, because you can't really make them do it. You can't make them put anything in their mouth, and you can't make it come out. Those are the two things that a kid is actually in charge of. And so, like a baby holds a head up when supported, well, if they're left in the car seat, right, they haven't had those neck muscles. If they're strapped in and left the majority of the time, if they're left in a rocker or a bouncer for all the feedings, not only do they lose out on that neck support, but also the engagement. And I cannot tell you how awful it is that during feeding we're doing this. Myself included. I nursed 4 kids. I did that. I sat there on my phone and read, and so all these babies are missing out on that eye contact and the talking and the cooing and the one-on-one because we're doing this. And so important that they have the engagement, and it's a positive experience with feeding. Let's see. Sits in the high chair supported. So I do not like that reclined line. I do not like to recline children when feeding at all. If they're not sitting up independently, I'm very hesitant to start any solids. It's their motor skills are not quite there. So it goes, if they don't have the motor skills to sit up, you're already putting them at a risk of choking, because that food's going to slide back before they're ready and controlled. So little side note on that. Opens mouth for a spoon. So a lot of the kids, if you'll read some of those, I'm not going to read all of them, they're probably still in those squeeze pouch baby foods if they have been traditional. So I've seen 2 things. They're either on a bottle still at like past 1. If you get some of these kids, there's juice, there's chocolate milk, and then they maybe get a squeeze pouch. And so you're going to see delayed feeding skills because they've never been offered a spoon. They've never been offered tablespoons, never do mushy things. Like none of those things have they had opportunity. And so now they've gotten used to a texture. Now they've gotten used to only sweet things. And so it's going to be a challenge to introduce some of those things when you get kind of that 1 to 2. Sometimes y'all, even 3-year-olds, when we get them and they have not had a exposure. You talk about how expensive food is right now. It may be that they've only had 2 or 3 things that have sustained them. And so now they're very picky eaters because they just haven't had the experience with it. No, you're fine. So let me see, the utensils, straw, all of those things. Side note on feeding and trauma. If you have a kiddo that has been abused or neglected, there are things, and I think Mindy kind of touched on it, you had no idea was going to set them off. So you turn on the bath water and they lose their minds. And because sometimes when you get those kiddos, they're not going to tell you. Even as a practitioner, I would call and be like, can you please give me some background? And they were like, we can't yet. I'm like, okay. Well, then I'm in this house and they turn on the water and they lose their mind. We'll come to find out they were being abused in the bathtub. Okay, then that makes sense. Or when it comes time to bedtime, like they won't let me put a pillow on the bed. Well, parent was smothering them, trying to get them to sleep. So feeding especially, we've got to tread very lightly. So there was a study, it was in one of my feeding trainings, and so when you force feed a child, they equated the brain response as sexual assault. So when you're forcing something into someone's body, it was the same response. So some of these kids that are force-fed, it was worse than any, because it was a safety. They thought they were going to die because that food was shoved into their mouth. Or that juice, or they were put in an unsafe environment, laying down, or whatever it is. So I'm always cautious with feeding. I think that's when I saw parents most angry with their child in front of me, is that they wouldn't take it. And so tread lightly with feeding. I will say this, very much call in a feeding therapist if it gets to the point where they're losing weight or you're not making any progress, really getting some hand-holding through that process so we're not making an undue, just more of a, not, I don't want to call it trauma because it's not, but unpleasant experience. Even in your home where everything is great, if it's a firm thing and we haven't rooted out where kind of these behaviors are coming from, it can be cause some of that. So I'm going to pass it back to Mindy. When we get kind of towards the end, we're going to talk about, okay, well, that was all a lot. What do I do with that? So we'll get to kind of what the resources are and what to look for specifically when you do think, hey, I need some help outside of this. So we'll get to that.
Thank you. Yes, I was about to say, you might hear all this and decide I'm never going around children again. Like, that's it. I am done. Hopefully, we will persuade you otherwise. So there are some tried and true methods of how to engage children in even the most stressful situations. I'm going to turn this where I can see a little better. So the first thing, whenever you are caregiving for a child from a hard place, whether that's you're a Sunday school teacher or an academic teacher or you're the foster parent or an adoptive parent, you want to go back to the beginning of co-regulation. So as we looked at before, these kiddos do not have the skills and the capacity to calm themselves down, to regulate themselves. And so you almost want to picture a 2-year-old when you're looking at that child and they're having an anger outburst or a tantrum or something like that, and think, okay, if this was a 2-year-old having a tantrum, what would I do? And go to that type of an engagement. And so TBRI calls this a time in instead of a time out. Sending a traumatized child when they are emotionally escalated to be by themselves is not helpful to them. They don't have the skills to know what to do, to pull from. They don't have the executive thinking to really reason through those moments. And so you go into a time in, you turn into them. Let's sit down. Let's get a drink of water. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's get your parasympathetic nervous system online. Let's get you calmed down. An example of this is I worked with a 15-year-old juvenile probation young man. He was huge. I mean, he walked into the therapy room and I kind of like backed up a little bit because I was like, oh, okay, what are we going to do here? And he had a just horrific history of trauma. He would get so upset because part of this is going to sound strange, but part of trauma treatment is you want to actually provoke some of their emotions so you can help them learn to regulate. And so you have to bring out genuine emotion in the therapy session. So I'd go for it. I'd get him angry, and then the only thing that calmed him down is that we had regulation rooms where I worked. We had a big rocking chair, and he would go sit in that rocking chair, and he needed some deep pressure, so I'd just kind of put my arm around him, and he would rock. 15-year-old, tattoos, all the things that you're thinking of, like, okay, that's not a very sensitive guy. Oh, he was, and he would just rock until he calmed down and he regulated. Obviously, I couldn't put him in my lap like a 2-year-old to rock him. There's laws against that. So we just made do, and he would get himself regulated. Then we would talk. Here's what happened to your body just then. Here's what you needed. And we would start building those executive functioning things. Allow for lots of structured play. So what structured play is, it's not just, hey, go play. Go do what you want. It is you actually getting in the floor with the child and using play to teach them. It has limits. It has boundaries. It has teaching and learning. It's not them off by themselves just having decompression play, which is great. Kids need that. All kids need to be able to play without you saying a word to them. But these kiddos particularly need a lot of structured play. Play is the language of childhood. This is how they learn peer relations. This is how they learn academic subjects. This is how they learn limits and boundaries and expected behaviors and how to process their emotions and process the world around them. One of my favorite quotes by Benjamin Spock is, "A child loves his play, not because it's easy, but because it's hard." That is where they deal with everything because they don't have that language capacity yet. That's that 10% of the brain that we're still waiting on, is for them to use dialogue to be able to learn and grow and understand. So early childhood up to even 6, 7, 8 years old, they are learning primarily through the mechanism of play, and it needs to be play with the caregiver. Repair the ruptures. So it's not that you need to be perfect around these kids. You're going to mess up. I'm going to mess up. So the thing that you just need to keep in mind is we're not expecting or asking you to go in and be with these kids and be a perfect caregiver, but you do need to repair the ruptures. That's something they don't have experience with oftentimes. So whenever you blow it, you go to them and try to regain connection and attunement with you. Hey, I responded out of frustration when you did that. I should have been more compassionate, or I should have been more patient. Would you let me try that again? Would that be okay? That goes a long way with a kid who's not ever experienced that kind of relational learning back and forth. You're modeling. The 3 C's of caregiving. What you want to think about when you're trying to engage kiddos, especially when they're dysregulated and in really intense emotions: clear, calm, command. You want to be clear. Use as few words as you can, because again, they're in their feeling brain. They can't process a lot of language. So you want to just say what needs to be said to get them moving in the right direction with no more. Sorry. And then calm. You need to be regulated. And if you find yourself, because kids push your buttons, they're going to find all the buttons you didn't even know you had, and they're going to push them 1,000 times a day. And so you need to practice regulation. And when you get escalated, you need to be able to get yourself to where you can calm down before you engage that child. And it's amazing how young they can get that. You can say even to a 3 or 4-year-old, I need a timeout for a minute. I'm going to go get calm, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about this. They perceive that very well. Command. Children need a safe and loving authority. They thrive in that type of a relationship. Child-led stuff is actually very ineffective. They need that sense of, this person is my parent, my caregiver. They can handle things. They're in control. They know what to do, and I can trust them. The kid doesn't know what they need. They don't know what to do. They are relying on you being in command from a loving place of authority. And that's where kids thrive. They need you to be consistent. They need you to be predictable. They need you to be warm and connected as you are correcting, teaching, and disciplining them. Oh yeah, and then Anna, you were going to talk about intervention.
Real quickly, I forgot to say about motor development. Some of the everything kind of goes around that. So if they're not laying down, I'm pivoting back. If they're not sitting up, if they're not crawling, if they're not walking, language will be delayed. So what we see is, if I see a kid that's not walking yet and they're 15 months and they're delayed language, I'm like, hang on, get them walking, and then let's get there. And you see those. So if you see a motor delay, you're most likely going to see a language delay and a feeding delay. Anyway, back to this. So when you get to the point where you're like, I need outside help, I think we need a speech therapist or feeding behavior. I think I need outside help. specifically with very young children. So I would say even up to 6. Caregiver involvement in the therapy is vital. So, and in the natural setting. So I only did a clinic for maybe a year, because if you drop off your child and I do the structured therapy with him, and you go do your errands, you come back, we're going to see very little, minimal. You're supposed to take out the trash or something. She has a timer for everything. I love it. I love it. This is my mother. I can say that. There's a timer for everything. Where was I? Oh, routines-based assessment. Okay, so a child learns in their natural development. We're talking about brain development. They're not going to be able to take those skills that they were being taught in a clinic setting and transfer those at home. It just doesn't work very well. And so when you do look for that, feel free to come ask us where to find it. But a intervention that's done in home with caregiver involvement. So I am not the expert of your home, and I'm not the expert of your child. You are. I need to know what you've tried, what hasn't worked, and then I need you to practice it. So especially with these kiddos, it does not help if I gain the attachment with that child, because I'm going to leave. And then you're left with, well, now I've got to do it. And you haven't had any practice. And so I would just highly encourage that they do a routines-based assessment, which means from the time this kiddo wakes up till bedtime, and sometimes overnight, what does your day look like? What are the issues? What do they look like at each step? And then let's make goals based on this child in this environment with you as the caregiver. Very, very important. If I make a goal for a 2-word utterance, because that's what development he should, but it's really not important to you, are you going to do it? No, I need to know what's most important to you. So that's my little caveat on when you do it's not all the same. If you go to a speech therapist, it's not the same intervention. For very small children, it's very important that it's in home with a caregiver.
Okay, I realize we're like running over our allotted time, so I'm gonna speed things up a little bit. So effective communication when a child is dysregulated, when they're in an emotional tantrum of some kind, is to go back to remember they're in their feeling brain. So you want to be communicating to the child through action and meeting concrete needs. So nonverbal communication is the most effective. When a child is throwing a fit, having an anger outburst, you want to get the child, have them sit down, offer them water, offer a snack, and start deep breathing with them. We're trying to regulate before we start trying to teach correct discipline. And you want very few words. Sensory processing considerations. So kids from hard places oftentimes have sensory processing needs. They have disorders around processing sensory things around them. So the goal is to help the child learn to have sensory input while staying in an integrated brain. Integrated means upstairs brain and downstairs brain are working together. It's not one goes offline. And so the way we help kiddos with a very dysregulated nervous system who do not have all parts of their brain online at the same time is through proprioceptive input and vestibular input. And all that means, it sounds way fancier than it actually practically works out to be. All that means is that when these children are dysregulated, they need certain activities to calm their nervous system. And so what's great about proprioceptive input is it can be calming for children who are easily overwhelmed by sensory, or it could be alerting for children who need increased stimulation for attention and learning. So if they're hyper or hypo, these things work for both type of child. So indicators that a child is seeking proprioceptive input: bites and chews on objects, bangs their body parts against things, holds objects with excessive pressure. So think of the kiddo when they're coloring, right? It's like they're about to put a hole in the paper. Enjoys rough and tumble play. Prefers to run, jump, stomp when they should be walking. They walk on their tiptoes a lot. Or they hyperextend their joints, like pulling back their fingers. So activities to help. Weight-bearing activities are crawling through a tunnel, or if you don't have a tunnel, like just having them do, what is it called, an army crawl, where they're like elbow over elbow. Push-ups, climbing, and then you have resistance activities you can do, pushing and pulling, wall pushes. I use this one all the time because you can do it literally anywhere there is a wall. And so you have the child go up to the wall and you say, I want you to push as hard as you can, like you're going to move that wall. And then you count to 20. They have to hold it for 20 seconds, and then they rest for a few seconds, and then you have them do it again for 20 seconds. And you do this 3 or 4 times, and that actually resets their nervous system. Squeezing a stress ball is another example of resistance. Heavy lifting, carrying books, moving small furniture. So there's often times where you can do it if you have an older child and you don't want to draw attention that you're like intervening in a moment. You can just say, hey, would you move that stack of books to the other side of the room for me? I actually need it over there now. So there's lots of discrete ways you can intervene. Bubble gum. So that in that jaw, that chewing bubble gum gives you that deep proprioceptive pressure. Cardiovascular running, jumping in place, bouncing on exercise balls, deep pressure, tight hugs, weighted blankets or vest. Please note, for a very short time only. You don't want them wearing the weighted vest or having a blanket that's weighted on them for very long. And then functional activities, wiping tables, sweeping, mopping, vacuuming. So having your kids, healthy developing kids, help with chores around the house actually helps keep a regulated nervous system. And then you'll read those other things and you'll say, a playground has all of those opportunities right there for you. Just take them to the playground. And being outside has all kinds of benefits for the nervous system and mental health. Okay, vestibular. Vestibular input, so that is knowing where you are in space. A lot of these kiddos really struggle with vestibular, like kind of knowing. You'll notice they maybe fumble around a lot, run into things. They just don't, the inner ear fluid is just not quite working the way it needs to. So indicators for that they are seeking vestibular input. They climb dangerously high. It seems like they can't get high enough. They spin frequently. They seek out swinging. They never seem to get dizzy. They're always moving and running. Indicators that they're avoiding vestibular input. They refuse to ride the swing, won't climb playground equipment. They're scared of movement. They don't like rough housing. And they're overwhelmed or cautious when walking downstairs. You'll notice they're like brace themselves to go downstairs. Activities. So when it comes to vestibular, you have, it's a little bit different. So we said proprioceptive, you can use any of them if you need to calm or alert. Vestibular is different. There's calming ones and there's alerting ones. So if you have a kid who is hyper, they're angry, they've got a lot of energy, their nervous system is on go, then you want to have them do rocking, swaying, slow dancing. Row, row, row your boat is a great one. Riding in a swing, hanging upside down for a short time on playground equipment, or do a blanket swing where you have a grown-up on each side of the blanket, the kid gets in the middle, and you just lightly swing them. Those will help calm the nervous system. You have a kiddo who's having a hard time staying awake, their attention and focus is gone. You want to alert their nervous system. Spinning in a swivel chair, allow them to spin themselves, and spinning should be limited unless you have a throw-up bucket handy. Riding a scooter, skipping, galloping, running, cartwheels, walk across a balance beam, sliding down slides, playing leapfrog, playing the game Twister, obstacle courses, and skating and rollerblading are all alerting. Okay.
Oh, now me. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, gosh, y'all were great. I don't think you should give up speech therapy. I don't think you should.
Y'all, I let my license.
But anyway.
Take my boards.
I'm
that retired.
But anyway, so some of you may be sitting there and you have children from hard places and you're going, it sounds great, but what if, I'm still lost. What's the strategy I use? What do I do next? And so just we don't really have any pre-planned from here on, but we have ideas and kind of a dream of a support group or support team where if you're having, first of all, a little more in-depth training. I mean, there really needs to be like a full day. But the other would be to meet regularly and say, I've tried the things that I've heard about, but something's not working, and just support through all those, times when it's difficult. But even kids that aren't from hard places. I mean, we really don't need to separate them. There's this group, and then there's these groups, because all of our kids sometimes struggle with things, and we need support. So that another goal for today is, and we're going to have the Heart Gallery come and present. If you're interested in fostering, which we definitely want to encourage. I mean, the church needs to be doing that. We need to be praying about that. So we will explore that in a moment. But for those of you who just care about kids, is a support team within the church. And how that could look is, first of all, if you're just going to foster, I can't tell you how many times I'd had to, when I was with CPS, I'd have to take a baby in the middle of the night. And I mean, you're not prepared with every size clothes or anything a lot of times. So if we had a closet or a room where we had clothes in boxes, where we had pack and plays and a high chair and some diapers, and then we had another person that was like, you call me when you hear you're getting a baby. You know what age it is? 6 months old? Okay, I'm going to the place. I'm getting stuff and I'm bringing to you. That's one thing a support person could do. Another thing is laundry. After they get a new child, you're going to pick up laundry for a few days in a row, or take meals, or go do respite childcare, or run errands, or drive the other kids if they need rides to school. There's a multitude of things that everybody in the church could do to support families who are doing this for children. So we would love to start something like that. The last thing I want to show you before we introduced Heart Gallery to come up is I work for an organization, I'm still working for them, that has, it's not really a program, it's a system of care. It's called Help Me Grow. And it's more than case management. It is a network. In our network, it's called Help Me Grow, Help Me Thrive of North Texas, 15 counties. But it's a national initiative. But there is a data system that we're given that everything in that 15 county area is loaded in there, every kind of resource. And providers of those resources are welcome to join it, to go in and update. Like, we have a waiting list, here's our eligibility. And the cool thing about it is, and you will find this out there, there's 2 phone numbers, one for kids 0 to 5 and the other is 6 to 17. There's a phone number. A person just calls this number. They talk to someone that's called, they're a navigator, and they talk to them. It's not a machine, it's not AI, it's not any of that stuff. It's a person. I actually know the person here. And they can do developmental screenings of your child over the phone to help. Do we need to get any of those? A needs assessment, or you could just say, I can't find a pediatrician that takes Medicaid. I can't find child care. I can't find food. And they help locate those resources for you, give you the contact number, but they stay with you for a few months to see, did you get connected? Did it work out well? Do you need anything else? And you don't have to enroll. You're not enrolling in a program. You're not signing up on any. How do we fund it? We write grants all the time. And that's kind of what I'm doing now. I track grants and every task we're supposed to do, and have we done them? But that's how we're doing it. But the Help Me Thrive, that's our creation. We asked the national office, what about the teens? What about the ones that are over 5 years old? And so we're piloting that, for those resources. So that's what this is. The rest of the booklets out there are just normal child development to give you kind of an idea of that. So I think that's all I'm supposed to. Yes, we all will. Yes. Next, we want to bring up here Tanya and Lynetta.
I think it's just Tanya today. Yes.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Okay. Oh.
Can we plug it straight in here? I think, and that should do it. Move this one out of the way. Here's your microphone.
Oh, it is. Is that it? It is. Oh, good. Good. I'm Tanya Howe. I'm with the Heart Gallery in North Texas. And what the Heart Gallery is, it's a program that works in the 19 counties that are surrounding the Dallas-Fort Worth area, working to find permanent homes for the kids that are in our area that are free for adoption, living in foster care. I started out doing adoptions 27 years ago, so I've done 25 years worth of adoptions. In the last 2 years, I've been running the Heart Gallery. And all of those years that I did adoptions, I did get to work with all the families. The majority of adoptions that I did were from kids that were living in foster care, and they were free for adoption, so I placed them in permanent adoptive homes. And the other group of children that I work with are children that are, there's an adoption plan made for those kids by their birth family, and because they don't feel equipped to take care of the kids because of their medical conditions. So I do place lots of babies for adoption still today. That's still one of my passions, and it's usually a baby with a diagnosis. Like today, or this afternoon after I leave here, I'm going to be placing a baby with Down syndrome because mom and dad didn't feel like it. So those are my two areas that I work. I'm really passionate about the foster care system and getting the kids out of foster care. I think our state, unfortunately, is one of the better states in doing that. Texas does place a lot of kids from foster care where other states do not. We have started this program, the Heart Gallery program, across the entire state of Texas, which means there's 11 Heart Galleries in Texas. And I just handle the ones that are in these 19 counties, but there are 11 separate Heart Galleries in Texas alone. But other states are doing it also. And so other states are jumping on the bandwagon, and they're trying to place their kids, get them out of foster care, because unfortunately foster care can be just as abusive, just as traumatizing to the kids that are having to live in that system, and they've already lost their parents, and now they're kind of in a limbo state while they're in foster care. And so
I think so. Oh, if you would grab that microphone. Thank you. That way we can make sure everyone can hear.
connections.
Well,
So the slide, if you're interested in this, you can take a picture of this QR code and we will send you the entire slide so that you can have that. It's kind of a sign-up sheet there. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is the need for adoptive families, the need for foster families. So we definitely need more and more foster and adoptive families in this area. What the Heart Gallery does is pretty much what I just told you. We're out there getting the word out. I do that at events like this. If you have other like ladies events or even a sporting event or any kind of event where there's families together, I can actually bring the entire Heart Gallery, which are portraits of kids, and I can do these presentations also. But I'm always looking for places where I can be in front of people to do this work. We're also going to talk about a journey that our children go through when they're in foster care. So we're going to figure out how they even get into that system to begin with and ways that we can get them out and what the goals are for our state too. We're going to talk about how you adopt through foster care, because I have learned over the years a lot of people have no idea you can adopt through foster care. It is a free adoption, which is another big thing. Most people think adoptions cost a lot of money. Not through foster care. It costs nothing. So we're going to talk about how to adopt through foster care. And then we're going to talk about the basic requirements for being an adoptive parent versus being a foster parent and what it takes to actually become one. And then just the commitment and the mindsets of the families that do this work and how you can be successful. Now, in the United States alone, there's over 400,000 kids that are sitting in foster care. That is a lot of kids that have been abandoned, have lost their moms and dads, just see them once a week or once a month in the CPS's office across the state. And so those are a tremendous amount of kids. But in Texas alone, there's over 30,000 kids. So we are almost the biggest state, so we do have the most kids. In our area, the 19 counties that I talked about, these are the counties here. There's over 3,000 kids that are in this area alone that need foster homes or need adoptive homes. Most of those kids are free for adoption, but unfortunately, we don't have the manpower to find homes for them all. We don't have the CPS workers that are adoption workers that can find homes, but more than half of those kids in this area are free for adoption. And that's a 1-year-old all the way up to 18-year-olds. And so we're the Heart Gallery of North Texas. And so all I do is put up Heart Galleries across. And if you go to some of the malls in the area, Dallas malls, Fort Worth malls, there's Heart Galleries in those malls. The YMCAs have been really nice. They let me put Heart Galleries there. A lot of churches let me put them. They're more temporary where they come and go throughout churches. And so I'm just looking for families that can think or want to get more information about adoption through foster care. Okay, so our mission is to find matched adoptions for these kids. A matched adoption is what a straight adoption is. It means the same thing. That means that you're not becoming a foster parent. That means you are approved to adopt. That means that you're approved to adopt a certain age, a certain race, a certain number of kids. Those are matched adoptions. Families that do this, and my passion grew 25 years ago when I heard all the adoptions or over half the adoptions that were happening were families that were going to other countries and bringing kids back. And I thought, if they can do it, these are all older kids they're bringing back, and most of the time they don't even speak the same language, but they're going to Guatemala or China or wherever to find these kids. And here we have our own kids in our own town and our own state, and we're not finding families for them. And so started pushing this movement 25 years ago, and it really has made a difference as far as matched adoptions. Matched adoptions, that means they can be 17 years old. And in fact, that is the oldest child I've ever placed for adoption is 17 years old. It can be a sibling group of 6 or 7 or 8 kids. The largest number of kids in one family I've ever placed was 7. And they had never been parents before. Mom and dad had never parented in their life, and they took 7 kids. And I love that family. I still keep up with them. The oldest one's just graduated college, in fact. But I knew that family was going to be good because I could see their energy level, and I could see their excitement and their willingness never to give up. And they've gone through some rugged stuff, but they've come out stronger on the other side. So that's what my goal is to find families. Now, most of these kids are age 7. That's the average age of kids that are free for adoption in the state of Texas. And so if you're coming to do a straight adopt because you want a baby through the state, it's really not going to happen. You're going to have to be open to sibling groups. If you're only open to one child, they have to be 7 years old and older. And the more, if you're open to boys and girls, of course, if you're open to different races, the faster that can happen for you. There are... Most agencies won't even approve you, I'll say that, unless you're open to a 7-year-old or older. Now, these are some of our partners that we work with that do this work. And you can see the malls run here, the YMCAs, but there's 2 big organizations that are, they are focused through the churches. And I don't know if your church is involved with them at all, but Hope Local is one that works in this area, trying to educate the people in the counties on the west side of the region, where Embrace is the one on the east side of the region that tries to get the churches involved. Now, this is our journey for our children, what they go through before they come into foster care. And so what happens is that a report is made, and us as adults, it is our responsibility, it's the law. You have to report if you suspect abuse and neglect if you're an adult in Texas. And so if you see it, hear it, feel it, you need to call somebody. You need to say, I'm worried about this kid for whatever reason. So when that happens, they send in an investigator. Depending on the call, it might be that day, but it might be the next day. It depends on how serious they interpret what you've called on. And so the investigators come in, and they work with the family, they work with the child, and they make a determination. Is it safe for this child to stay in this home, or is it not? Now, the state of Texas, I'd say the last 5 years, they're really working on not removing kids, because we did go through a little phase there, a few years actually, where they removed kids too quickly. And now we're putting more money into helping that family and helping that child stay there. And that's really what we want. We want that child to stay there, because abandonment and loss is just as bad as abuse and neglect sometimes for these kids. And so we want to help mom and dad be better and stronger moms and dads. And so that's where our money is going. But there's still those cases that those kids cannot stay there. And so that's when the investigator makes the determination that kid needs to go into foster care. So we need foster parents that have that mindset to be, this is a temporary thing, because they keep that child in the foster home during that time period for at least 12 months. And so they're going to be in foster care for 12 months while the state works with the family to try to get them parenting classes or off their substance or a better job or whatever, food, whatever they need. So they come up with a service plan. They determine this family can be successful if they have these items in place, and the families work towards that. Now, if they can't finish in a year, sometimes the judge will say, okay, at least you're trying. I'll give you a little more time. But if they don't try at all, and sometimes they don't, unfortunately, they'll go ahead and terminate the rights of those parents. If that were to happen, the child in foster care becomes available for adoption. And so if they can reunify, we want them to, but if they can't, that's when Heart Gallery gets involved, that's when agencies get involved, and we try to place that child for adoption. Any questions about how all that works? But you can see, in a child's life, to me, it's amazing. A year in a child's life is so long. I mean, it is so long. And to have that year of limbo, and it is truly just limbo. They're just waiting what's going to happen next kind of deal. Or even going up to 2 years. That's what happens to our kids. But when they get free for adoption, unfortunately, we don't have enough manpower to get them out. So they may be free for adoption, but we really do need to do better about getting them out and not just letting them sit there for a year. So one of my big jobs is I do Wednesday's Child, which I don't know if y'all have ever seen that on Channel 8 News. One of my favorite things to do. So I find the places where the kids get to do their activity or whatever. But I did it with this one kid 9 months ago. You know, we did this wonderful filming of him. We did all this great stuff. I got all these home studies. And then over spring break, I was out taking photographs of kids to put on the Heart Gallery website. And I saw Chase, and I thought, okay. And I went in just thinking it was a different Chase, because 9 months later, you know, I sent them 12 home studies, so I know they had families. but they don't have the manpower, I guess, to do it, because their Chase was, again, he was, 8 inches taller and had the circles under his eyes were deeper and darker than they were just 9 months earlier. And it was really the most heart-wrenching thing for me to see. What was sad about it is I walked into this home thinking, this is the most beautiful home I think I've ever been in. But it was the saddest kid. So it's not the stuff, it's not the home, it's the nurturing and the love. And so, yeah, I left that house making phone calls. Why is Chase still in foster care? Why is Chase not placed in a permanent home? Because it was heartbreaking to me. But that's my goal this year. I'm just going to push as hard as I can push and just try to get these kids out of foster care as fast as I can. And other states, I mentioned about Texas, but other states leave them in there for, like Oklahoma. We're licensed in Oklahoma, so I go up there, and their attitude is even different. Well, mom and dad might get off drugs, or mom and dad might get, their life together or whatever. And I said, the kid's been in care for 7 years. How long are you going to give mom and dad? So I love the fact that our state is, at least that we're trying. We have the laws to try to get them out quicker, but we just don't have the manpower right now. Now, the kids that are in foster care that are free for adoption, this is their normal ages for these kids. Only about 20% of them are 3 years old and younger. And so if they're in foster care, they're free for adoption, that low of a percentage, the idea that the foster parent probably is going to be the one. If they can't send that child back to the birth family, then the foster parent's usually in it to adopt a younger child. So they'll probably adopt, and that's why it makes it so much harder to adopt a 3-year-old or younger. Now, your 4 to 11-year-olds, the majority of the kids, that's their age, and those are the ages that I tend to place for adoption more. So there's almost 60% of the kids are between 4 and 11 that are in the foster care system. And then above 11 is to 17 is a smaller amount too. And the state just assumes that if you're over the age of 11, you can fend for yourself a little bit more, and so they don't remove those kids quite as much. But 70% of the kids are part of a sibling group. So it's 2 kids or 3 kids or 6 kids or 9 kids, so just keep that in mind. There are sibling groups. And being an adoption worker for so long, I really liked placing the sibling groups better than the one single kid. And a lot of people don't quite understand that because, there's more laundry, there's more food to prepare, there's more homework, there's more all that stuff. But if a child has a sibling, they have already lost everything except that sibling. So it does help them bond and mesh into a family a little bit better. So siblings, I always liked placing more than just single kids. Now, this is the ethnicity breakup of the kids that are in care right now. So about 32 to 34% are Caucasian kids, about the same percentage as African American. Hispanic, I think, is really growing higher than what this number says. I haven't checked it as of this year, but there's too many people moving to Texas. So Hispanic kids right now, or last time they checked, was about 26%. And then the 8% is other Asian, just a smaller group of people. So families that are open to all ethnicities, all races, I promise get placement 2 weeks after I get them approved. The more open you are, the faster that happens. Now, adoptions through foster care, there's 3 different kinds. So the match adoptions we talked about a little bit already, but there is foster to adopt and kinship to adopt. And so just knowing the difference between those 3, I think, is important. So adoptions that are matched adoptions, once they happen, they are state funded, meaning you don't have to pay a home study fee. You don't have to pay for supervisions. You don't have to pay for training. They are state funded. They pay the agencies to do that for families. And so those are matched adoptions, state funded. You can find the kids on Adopt US Kids. You can find them on the TARE webpage. I don't know if you've ever been on that. And then you can find them on Heart Gallery. So you can just Google Heart Galleries of Texas, and all 11 of them will be up. And there's a lot of kids on those Heart Gallery ones, which, of course, I like the most. But there are the kids on Heart Gallery that have videos. And so it really says a stronger story. You can see the kid on the video a little bit. You can see their personality more than just a still picture. But just keep in mind, if you're going to agencies and they're saying, I need $2,000 for home study or something, you need to say, oh, wait a minute, and back up on that. So matched adoptions, Birth parents' rights are already terminated. They've already tried the birth parents, so it's a done deal. They're not going to come back, because that's probably the number one question. Can they come back? No, they can't come back. The rights are already terminated. And Texas is pretty strict on that, and it's very seldom that you would ever hear that they would even give a parent a chance. Now, they might look for extended parents, which is what they should do, like grandparents, aunts and uncles, and things like that. But if it's after the 18 months, 12 to 18 months, their rights are terminated. They've already explored all the extended families too. Like I said, all these kids are on, it's called the TARE website. That's Texas Adoption Exchange, Resource Exchange, and Heart Galleries. And these families are selected on their abilities. So I have families all the time that call thinking, I'm looking for a child for them. I'm not. I'm looking for a family for a child. And so it's a different frame of mind. I mean, we're working hard for that child to find the family that's best suited for that child's needs, because we have to meet the child where they are. You can't bully or beg or force a child to be what you want them to be. We have to find families that are open to the idea of meeting that child where their needs are and working with them. You are considered a permanent family the day that child moves in your home. The language, the atmosphere, the commitment has to be there the very first day that child moves into your home. That's really hard to do. That takes a lot of faith to do something like that. But you do have information, just so that you know you've read the file. You know what's happened to that child. You know how many times that child's moved foster homes. And unfortunately, average is 6 months in each foster home. And so you can see the trauma that foster care does for these kids. If they move every 6 months, that means they've lost all their friends every 6 months. They change schools, they've changed churches, they've changed everything every 6 months. So you having the attitude that this is forever has to be there, because that child's not going to believe you. I mean, why is it forever here when the last 5 families just sent me away? So it takes a little bit of time for that trust to happen. You have to commit before that child commits to you. I'll just say that. They are, like I said, sibling groups usually and older children and matched adoptions. And then you're foster to adopt, and I really should have put dual license families. That means the same thing. Some agencies call it dual license. Some agencies just call it foster to adopt. So that means you're approved to foster and you're approved to adopt. And you have one home study that says both things that you're approved to. So the foster to adopt, what's different about it, a lot of agencies, like the agency that I worked for so long, Gladney, we did foster to adopt, but still the day that child moved in, it might be foster care paperwork you're signing, but your attitude, your commitment, everything is still the same. Adoption is still thought this is going to be forever, even though it's a foster care paper that you're signing. The child isn't really told that, you're doing it because we're waiting on a birth certificate, or we're waiting on this document to get through, or we're waiting on something, is why we do foster to adopt a lot of times. Dual license families, what that means is that you're licensed to foster and adopt, and a lot of families will do that, but the child may not be free for adoption. The goal may not be adoption yet, but we think maybe it's heading towards adoption, and so that's where the dual license would come in. And those are the difference. One's a bigger risk, I'll say, than the other one. Children are all in the custody of the state. So the state really is the legal parent at this time. You are the legal caregiver as a foster to adopt family, but the state is the legal parent. You have to follow all the foster care rules. So the state has a tremendous amount of policies and procedures that all foster families have to follow. And you do have a good support group. It's hard for a family to do this. That you need a church. You need a family of people to help support you. You need breaks. You need someone to tell you you're doing it right, or you might need some help in some area too. So the more people that you have that's in the world that you're in around foster and adopt, the better off and more successful family that you'll be. And then there's kinship adoptions. And so I'm hearing more and more kinship adoptions that are happening. And that means that you have a cousin, or you have somebody that calls your family. Some state worker says, I know you have a cousin that had a baby and they need a place, and we need kinship placements. And so that could be a foster kinship placement. So those are the 3 different kinds of adoptions. Kinship placements can come in knowing that they're going to be placed permanently, or they can come into your home, where they still might be working with the birth family. So that it kind of works both ways on that one. Now, if you adopt a child from the state of Texas, and we're really unbelievably fortunate compared to other states when it comes to this too, but in most cases, you'll get an adoption subsidy. An adoption subsidy lasts until a child is 18 years old. We pay a monthly stipend depending on the needs of the child. So you as a family would get a check every month, and it's not as much as a foster payment would be, because foster care families do get paid daily every time a child's in there, but you get paid a certain amount depending on the child's needs every month. If the child is white, if that child is Caucasian and 6 years old, then you get that stipend. You get that monthly payment. You also get Medicaid will be paid for, and you can put them on your own insurance, but Medicaid would be a secondary insurance. But what's amazing about Texas is college is paid for. So that's how I got the family to take the sibling group of 6. I said, well, college is paid for, and so he did it. So anyway, and they're all going to college too. So anyway, so that's it. If you adopt a child that is any other race but white, it's the age of 2. And so that's the reason that's done that way, is they're trying to encourage more families of color to adopt, because it's really interesting to me that mainly only white people adopt. There are some families of color, but the majority of them are white. So this gives families of color an opportunity, or maybe incentive, to adopt also from the state foster care system. Another reason a child will get subsidy is they have a handicapping condition. So even if they're not in the foster care system, like all these babies that I place that is really a private adoption, if you have Down syndrome, you get subsidy. If you have spina bifida, you get subsidy. And so that helps families with that are open to adopting kids with medical conditions. And then those are the main things you get: your Medicaid monthly stipend, your college, but they also pay for court. So the fourth one is they pay to finalize the adoption. And so finalizing the adoption happens 6 months usually after the child's placed in your home, and you would pay a lawyer to do that, and the state actually pays for that. So any questions on adoption and how that works? So foster care. So foster care is also a program that we need. And we have foster care parents that they are foster care. They're not interested in adopting. They just want to help a child for a period of time till they can go home to their birth family, or they're actually adopted by another family. So we do have the need for foster care also. Foster care, and you have to have a mindset that this is a temporary placement. I'm only going to do this for a period of time and help this child get through a rough patch in their life, and then they're going to move on. Then there's kinship foster care, which is also the same thing. It's temporary. They're asking you to take your cousin or your sister's or your brother's children, and you're doing that as a kinship placement or foster placement. And then there's, of course, the medically fragile, and that is a huge need, and that's one reason I have such a passion for it, because I see so many kids that if they're born and they need to, and they have a major medical, they sit in foster care till they're 18 years old, and then they go to an institution. They don't try. I'll put it that way. They don't try very hard to find permanency for kids in medical kids. But you do have to be licensed as a medical challenged home. There's a little more details if you're open to taking kids with medical conditions. One thing that's new, that's fairly new, is that our state is paying for professional foster parents. And so that means one parent has to stay home. I think they pay them a $50,000 a year salary. They only have one kid in their home, but it's the hardest of the hard kids. And so these kids usually come from the severe residential treatment center type facilities into a home, and it's one-on-one with a parent. And it's usually a 1-year time period, and then hopefully they're hoping after that 1 year that child can go into regular foster care and maybe even be adopted. So that is another option that's pretty new and I think was very much needed. After COVID, I think we all went a little nuts after COVID, and especially our kids. And so yeah, there was a little more challenge there. Foster care and kinship foster care, the goal is unification. It is temporary. Still the children in the custody of the state. And foster parents on occasion, and we have some really great foster parents that do this, will actually work with mom and dad. They actually help. This is how you change a diaper. This is why you need to let them put things in their mouth. All those things, they're kind of coaches for those birth parents. And it has made a big difference since foster parents have been allowed. Used to, they had a kind of a rule that you kind of hid from each other, and they didn't want the foster parent to be known by the birth family, but now they found that this actually helps the birth family so much more if they have an open-minded foster parent. As far as all of the programs, no matter if you want to be a foster parent or adoptive parent, if you want to do kinship, these are the requirements. So you do have to be over the age of 21. You have to have a stable lifestyle, whatever that is. You can be single, married, divorced, or widowed, but you can't be in the middle of a divorce, is what that means. You have no major life-changing things going on in your life, like changing jobs or moving into a big home. They want some time in between you becoming a foster parent and taking on a new job, for example. If you just got married, they want you to work on your relationship before you bring a child in. So they give you about a year. And every agency is depends on what the major life change is. Have to be financially stable. So if you think you can become a foster parent, maybe if you got $50,000 a year and you were doing that type of foster care, you could actually live on that money. But otherwise, you're not getting paid enough to really do anything except take care of a kid. So don't think that this is a moneymaker at all. It's really not. You have to pass your criminal background checks. And if you have something on your background, it doesn't mean you can't be. You just have to, let the agency know that you have this and you work through it, and they determine if you can or not. The only things that I know for sure is if you have like aggression or something like that on your background, that they wouldn't let you do that. Pre-service training, which we mentioned, this is a great class, what happened today, and they just barely touched on it, but the state of Texas requires 40 hours, so a full week of this kind of stuff. Most of the agencies that I know do utilize the TPRI, which is started at TCU. I mean, it's right here in our backyard. It's unbelievably amazing what it'll do with children and families that know how to use it. It makes a huge difference. And I did get to spend a lot of time with Karen Purvis, so I'm one of her big fans. And so anyway, it is proven. It has proven to make a huge difference with these kids. But I do find that families feel like it's too easy, you're letting the kids get away with it, things like that. But the main thing about TBRI there's so much to say about it, but whatever correction method that you're using, you just have to ask yourself, is this connecting or is this pushing them away? Is my correction connecting us? And so there's, sending them to their room is one of our typical, time out. And just, you all mentioned time in. You have to be time in. You have to have that type of parenting techniques. Now, you can have a timeout for yourself, but you need time ins with these kids, as many as possible, and you need to use all your senses when you're talking to them. They need to hear you, they need to feel you, they need to smell you, they need to feel your kiss on their forehead. I mean, that's how it works, and that is why it works. You have to meet all the standards of the documentation, meaning that we need to see your dog shot records and your driver's license and to be approved. There's a lot of documentation that you have to provide. A fire inspection and environmental health inspection, that's a standard thing for all agencies also. It means the fire marshal comes to your house and says your house isn't going to burn down, and your caseworkers are normally, or maybe some areas I think the health department might still do it, but very few if so, will come to your house and make sure that it's a safe environment, that you don't have things blocking the front door or whatever. So those are 2 inspections that go along with the home study. All families have to have TB tests. Everybody in the home still is a rule. You have to be healthy, and you can't have any contagious issues, and so TB is the one that they still focus on. The room in your home, you do have to have a bedroom for the child. It has to be a designated bedroom. If you want to foster or adopt 2 kids, they have to have a bedroom. It could be 2 girls or 2 boys in one room. That's perfectly fine. The only big rule is if they're over the age of 6, you can't have a boy and a girl in a room together. But you do have to have the space, and they have to have adequate space in a bedroom. You have to be open to a home study, and everybody in your whole household needs to go through that home study. For most agencies, it can be anywhere from 1 to 3 visits in your home where they're asking you questions about your childhood and your parenting philosophy and your discipline philosophy and your marriage and your relationships with your siblings and your kids. And so a home study is normally about 20 to 25 pages, and it's your life. And when I write a home study and I'm presenting a family to a kid, I want that home study to really show your personality and show why this child would be good in your home. And so spend a lot of time not only telling the facts, but telling a story of why this will work, why it will be successful. And so every agency will require a home study. The state tells us what questions to ask, and we have to follow that. But there are a lot of things that might surprise you. But I think most of it is pretty logical, and it's not to get anybody. It's just to learn about you so that we can make a good match with a child. Physical discipline, you do have to agree, no physical discipline, no spanking, no popping on the hands, no popping on the lips, no harsh words. You have to find different ways to discipline. Your discipline methods have to be teaching methods for this to really be successful. The old-fashioned traditional parenting and discipline does not work. It pushes you away from that, or that child away from you. So I've had families that said, I've had many families tell me, well, the Bible tells us we can spank. Well, the state of Texas says you can't. So you cannot spank these kids at all. And you have to be willing to learn new tricks on how to parent them. And then in Texas also, you can't have, for foster care, you can't have more than 6 children in your home at one time. Adoption, you can, but not in foster care. Any questions on any of this? No? Okay. And I think I did go through a little bit of this, but you do go through an application process to be a foster or adoptive parent. So you do have to fill out the application. You do have to give us all of the paperwork that we ask for. Those are items that the state of Texas require that's in your file, and they actually come to our offices and open that file, and they make sure that we're following their rules. The pre-service training, you do have to have 40 hours of pre-service training if you want to be an adoptive parent or a foster parent. If you want to be a therapeutic foster parent, it's even more than 40 hours. But you go through all of that training. You go through CPR and first aid. You go through medication, which is really crazy that we give so much medications to our kids in foster care, but we do teach y'all about medications and how they work and why and all of that. So that's all pre-service type training. And then the home study part of it. After the training, after the home study, you are approved. You are approved for number of kids, race, sex, and level of care. And so level of care means that some of you might come and say, I only want the basic kids, which is a term that they label, basic kids. There's not any basic kids that have gone through the foster care system, but they do label them as basic. That means they're the easiest. Or some families feel more equipped and they'll do moderate level, specialized level. Intense level, I try to stay away from intense level because I think they need more therapeutic. So they are, your home study will be licensed for that or approved for that. And there are certain behaviors that you'll talk about. I don't think my family can handle this kind of behavior, or I think we'll be really great at that kind of behavior, and that does help a lot about that. I think, aggression is definitely the one that scares people the most if you have a child that might be aggressive, but that's all written in the home study. So these are my most often questions that people ask. How long does it take? It's really up to you. Some people are really fast. They get all that paperwork in really quick, and they fill out the application really quick, and we get it all done. And, the fastest that you could get it done probably would be about 3 months for most agencies, but that would be really working hard and very diligent. But I would think 6 months is a good average for a family to go through the entire process and then land on approval. Just to get the 40 hours in, just to get the experience that you would need and get all your questions answered, I'd say 3 to 6 months is a normal time. We already talked about it shouldn't cost you anything. It'll cost you to get your TB test. It'll cost you to go get CPR and first aid. It'll cost you to get your background checks, but that should be all that it's going to cost you to do this. And on an average length of placement, like I said, for most families, for kids in foster care, it's 6 months is what most kids stay. But I'll tell you the truth, that is only because the foster parent says, I need this kid out. Most of the time, they're asking for the child to leave only because they're moving or they're getting a divorce or they're, it's something to go on with the foster parent's life more than it has to do with the kids. But that child can stay in your home as long as you let them, and the parents, their birth parents, if they've gotten their life together and it's been a year or it's been 18 months or something. Of course, in an adoptive home, they're in your home until they go to college or they get married, just like anybody else's kids. And then you don't have to be open to all kids, not in foster care and not in adoption. You are approved for age, race, sex, number of kids, and in both areas. And so those are the only kids that would be presented to you, whatever you're approved for. So the families that do this, you just know there is a lot of documentation to get approved, a lot of documentation afterwards. You have to write, activity logs. You have to write discipline logs. You have to write medication logs, things like that, and present that to your caseworkers when they come. You have to show that commitment, which I've already said. You have to give your heart before they're going to give their heart to you. So the commitment are the families that can handle. Wow. But a lot of these kids will test you, and they'll want to, are you really going to keep me forever? Let me hurt your favorite lamp or whatever, just to prove, or let me be mean to the dog, or let me whatever, so that you have to prove that you're not going to get rid of them. So that sometimes happens with kids. I have noticed that a lot of the trauma that they've gone through, or Karen Purvis also said this, that if you as a parent can show that commitment and do the intense parenting, use all your senses, get in their space as much as possible, and be part of their life, for 1 month can actually erase 1 year of trauma. But if you're just coexisting with that child, it's going to take so much longer. But you have to be very involved with that child to help them feel safe enough that they feel, okay, 1 month. And that helps families if they're going through rough time and say, well, you got a 7-year-old kid. I would say 7 years worth of trauma, 7 months worth of really intense parenting techniques will help tremendously, because you can't expect a child with trauma to move into your life and your life be exactly the same. You have to be prepared to know that it's going to change in all areas, and that is the biggest area, is your commitment and your interaction with that child. You have to agree to the discipline policy. So the state of Texas will make you sign saying you won't spank. The agency that you work with will make you sign you won't spank and you won't use other discipline techniques. And some of the ones that were really interesting to me, the vinegar on the tongue. You can't do that with, I've had he was actually a doctor. That's what he did. He put vinegar on their tongue. He didn't like what she said. And, those kind of things. Anything that would make them really feel bad. And then that's not a bonding opportunity, putting vinegar on their tongue. So no, that would be one of the things. You couldn't use chemicals. You couldn't use vinegar or Tabasco or some of those other old-fashioned techniques. Just your commitment to that child has to be shown, and your commitment to the agency and following their policies have to be shown and displayed every day. And I left copies of this out there on that table, but this is a roadmap to adoption. This, actually, every agency that you could call would have to do exactly these same things. Now, different agencies might add another thing or two, but they all have to do this. So if you really want the roadmap, it tells you exactly step by step what's going to happen through the process. And then on this one is, we're in Region 3. If you get on the state's webpage, and you click the star where the Region 3 is, where I put the star, you can see all of the agencies that license families in this area. You can have a long list, which I think is about 50 agencies. It's a lot of agencies. So you would pick your agency because of what your needs are and the resources that the agency offers. And so those are the questions that you would ask. Do you have, what kind of training do you have? Is it every day for a week? Is it once a month for, a year? I mean, every agency trains differently. Some still do it virtually. Personally, I'm not into that. I'd rather do it in person. I think you would have a better luck doing it in person, but some do it virtually, some do it hybrid, where half is virtual, half is in person, but, and then post-adoption. So that's the other thing. You need to ask what kind of, if you're doing adoption, what kind of resources post-adoption, because some agencies have a whole post-adoption team, and some say, sorry, you finalize, you're out of luck. So find out their training, find out their support systems, and find out what post-adoption after you finalize is like. But you can see all the agencies there. And then this is our Facebook. If you want to join our Facebook, Heart Gallery North Texas, this is the QR code for that. And we have Twitter also. So we do advertise kids on these sites all the time, and there's lots of parents talking about things that are going on and resources and stuff on these sites too. Any questions? Just sharing a room. So if they're 6 years apart, you wouldn't want to put a 14-year-old in with a 4-year-old, for example. So there's just sharing the bedroom.
Even if they have children already placed, fine.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the birth order question, it really depends on the kids. The oldest kid a lot of times really needs to be the oldest kid, and it wouldn't be a good match at all. But other kids that are the oldest, it's okay. I've seen more issues with the baby having to give up the baby role than the older kid. But yeah, you just need to know your kids that are in your home, and you need to figure out. And a lot of these kids, most of them, in fact, are actually physically smaller than their age. They're developmentally more delayed. I mean, they look younger and feel younger when they first come into your home. And I should have brought pictures of some of the kids, but I've always been amazed physically how different they look from the day I place them to 6 months later, when they've heard every day that they're precious, that they're worth it, that they, when they hear those positive things, how much they change not only emotionally but physically. And anyway, it's pretty interesting. Okay. Okay.
So if we have a school-age child that's in our home, do we have the option of homeschooling or private schooling, or have to be enrolled in the guys?
Well, so the foster care system, they're going to want you to do the public school. Adoption, you can get waivers. I have placed kids that, even in foster care, that they did so much better, the homeschool route. It's too overstimulating in a lot of school systems. In fact, the kids that are in the richer school systems, where they get to change desk every day and a new thing happens every day, they really have a hard time. It's more the smaller school systems they do better in, because it's more predictable. So yeah, the more money they have, the harder the kids have with this stuff. But yeah, you can come in and have a therapist say on evaluation, really this kid could benefit from homeschool, and you can get a waiver. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, one other thing, which y'all's program was really interesting to me. So the Heart Gallery of North Texas is going to get a lot of money in a couple of months, and it's all for post-adoption stuff. And what I'm supposed to do with that money is find agencies and nonprofits already doing the work and find ways that we can enhance that and to make it better. And so your list of resources, I think, is very beneficial. Things that I think families need are, besides the typical counseling, I really think parent coaching, which you mentioned one couple that has the TBRI training in this church. I mean, them being coaches to other parents that are doing it, that are brand new, if they've experienced that, that's what I think the money should go to, is to find parent coachings and help that system a little bit more. Other things, Other ideas they're called wraparound services, where they get all the professionals and they all communicate, because so often we go to this therapist for this thing and we go to this doctor for that, and they don't ever talk to each other. But having wraparound services where they all meet and say, hey, I'm trying this, and they work together, I think are the two main areas that would help our kids the most. Yeah. Okay, well, that's it. If y'all have any questions, my information's on that table back there.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I know most people, when they step into this, they say it's like you're learning a whole new world with a whole language of its own. And so that was really, really helpful. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging around. We hope that we've at least illuminated that aiming to find the meaning behind the child's behavior and what is going into what's happening on the inside of that child when you're seeing behaviors is really, really helpful and important when you're working with kids from hard places. So that's the end of our time today. I'm going to put my husband on the spot and ask, will you pray us out, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that you have set apart, that we can gather and receive training regarding these precious little ones that you've put in our lives and will put in our lives. Father, we just ask for